Good afternoon. On behalf of SDPI, I welcome you to this webinar on urban resilient infrastructure. Speakers are requested to keep their microphones off when they are not speaking to ensure good audio quality for everyone. You're also encouraged to switch on your cameras, especially when you're speaking, if your network allows to do that without any disruptions. We also invite questions from our audience and colleagues at the end or as the session goes. Please feel free to write them in the Q&A box on the right side. Speakers are requested to keep the chat box open in the window. You can also indicate that you want to speak by clicking the raise hand tab on the right side of the chat window. The session will also be telecasted live on SDPI's Facebook and LinkedIn page. For those watching us on live, please write your questions in the chat box. They will be conveyed to the speakers through our team. The seminar will be recorded and the video will be posted online. You are welcome to revisit the discussion later and feel free to share it with your network. Views expressed during all webinars are the views of the respected speakers and do not represent the policy of the organization. Today's session will be moderated by Ms. Saleha Qureshi, Research Associate SDPI, and now I hand over the session to her so we may begin the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, for setting up the housekeeping rules. Before I introduce the panelists, I wanted to have a brief background on the topic, as we have seen that large metropolitan cities are at high risk of vulnerability to the increased climate events and poor infrastructure, lack of public spaces, and improper urban planning. And Pakistan has been ranked as the most vulnerable country in the world. Pakistan is currently experiencing severe episodes of urban flooding, heat waves, which has resulted in loss of damages to livelihoods, building infrastructure, environmental degradation, lives, and economy. As of now, the number of people living in urban settlements will likely to surpass 3 billion by 2050. And this is due to the inappropriate housing and climatic events which Pakistan is dealing with. Unfortunately, Pakistan lacks urban resilience infrastructure to cope up with these natural hazards which are coming in series. And we have seen recently that significant damages have been occurred in Karachi, Lahore, and Rawalpindi due to lack of urban resilience infrastructure, smoother roads, uninterrupted power supply, increased productivity, and innovative technologies. Against this emerging climatic issue, we need experts, practical solutions for building resilience in Pakistan through their experiences and policies that how would we minimize the effects of disaster risk reduction for the vulnerable cities and communities. To begin with, I wanted to introduce my esteemed panelists. First of all, I welcome you all to have joined the webinar. Our first panelist is Mr. Mubashir Hassan. He is the disaster risk management professional and urban planner with 29 years of experience and working as manager disaster risk reduction and disaster risk finance in NDRMF. And earlier he has worked as general manager urban planning in Osmani and Company, DRR mainstreaming expert, and UN joint program, UNDP Pakistan. Welcome you, sir. Our second panelist is Ms. Aisha Khan. She is the CEO of CSCCC, Civil Society Coalition of Climate Change. She has over 20 years of experience in development work, and as a founder and head of Civil Society Coalition of Climate Change and Mountain and Glacier Protection Organization, she works at the community and policy level to strengthen climate action by supporting inclusive and participatory practices that promote social, ecological, and democratic equity. She's also the member of board of directors for several organizations related to climate change, and she also gives expert opinion on adaptation and mitigation. And she is also working convener to working group on climate security at Strategic Policy Planning Cell, National Security Division. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Our third panelist is Mr. Nabil Siddiki. He's the CEO of Modulus Tech. He's an engineer and a social entrepreneur, and he's currently the CEO and co-founder of Modulus Tech, which is a Pakistan-based startup, which is pioneering in affordable and net zero housing. He has been awarded by the UN for his social and environmental impact and was part of the Forbes 30 under 30 list in 2021. I welcome you all on the webinar, and to begin with, I wanted to first ask the question to Mr. Mubashir Hussain. Sir, since you have experience working with NDRMF and you are focusing on well-planned and resilient communities on their physical infrastructure by building resilient, disaster-resilient development culture in the country. So I'm asking about the NDRMF, that how does NDRMF took initiatives or coordinate for the disaster resilience management within urban centers, and if like some private sector come up with some urban resilient plan, so how NDRMF could help them in giving financing or some solutions to cater the vulnerable communities. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. And first of all, good afternoon to all participants. Am I audible? Madam, आवाज आ रही मेरी?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Okay. So first of all, thank you SDPI for organizing a seminar on this topic. You asked about NDRMF initiative and coordinate resilience management within urban centers. Let me first introduce NDRMF. It was established by Government of Pakistan in December 2016 as a not-for-profit Section 42 company, public sector company under the Companies Act 2017. And the basic mission is to reduce the socio-economic and fiscal vulnerabilities of the country and its population to natural hazards by prioritizing financing investments in disaster risk reduction and preparedness that has high economic benefit and taking into account the climate change. And you can see the impacts of climate change now; those are highly visible, and as well as disaster risks and their impacts. NDRMF basically has made able to develop a system for transparent, efficient, effective, and quick processing for proposals, projects, and fully ensuring the safeguards and mainstreaming of genders aspects within its projects. Basically, we receive funding from donors, and donors want to ensure certain compliances, and we do ensure those compliances. And NDRMF follows the corporate structure. So with this introduction of NDRMF, now I come to what about the projects in urban area. We are working all across the Pakistan, and we have projects. We entertain all the projects related to disaster resilience because our mission is to make Pakistan disaster resilient country. So we have thematic area, no doubt, within as per our result framework, and we issue call for proposals. Like currently, we have issued call for proposal in our two thematic area, that is disaster risk reduction and the hydromet and climate services, ecosystem restoration services. So we are working both in public and non-public sectors. And for public sector, we receive proposals through provincial or regional disaster risk management committees. And these committees are headed by respective ACS development. And public sector projects, usually they are routed through these provincial disaster risk management committees. Moreover, NDRMF follows the priorities set by governments in its plan and policies. Like we have plans to follow the NDMP National Disaster Management Plan 2012 and NFPP 4 National Flood Protection Plan 4 that is developed by Federal Flood Commission, wherein urban areas are included as per the severity of risk they are facing due to prevailing natural hazards, either climate change related or geophysical. However, human induced hazard we are not dealing directly. So, what I can say here that basically we are focusing enhanced disaster risk management capacity in urban areas as well, establishing a national emergency response system. Like we are also funding 1122 emergency response system. So that is catering for all disasters, disaster situation, all emergencies. We have thematic area in our DRR theme like infrastructure. If we talk about infrastructure intervention, we deal with flood protection, water conservation, land stabilization, then retrofitting of public sector buildings. As I already said, the emergency response system, we build the capacity, we provide the equipment. Then one of the important areas, the community-based disaster risk management. This is a grassroots community development wherein the community is empowered to face, being the first responder to face the risk and to manage the risk. Multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessment, which is a prerequisite for investments, then early warning system. And after pandemic COVID-19, we are also dealing with health emergencies as well. And on the other hand, we are also providing funding for hydromet and climate services and nature-based solutions for ecosystem restoration and climate adaptation. Moreover, another area where we are working is disaster risk financing, where NDRMF is taking lead. Basically, in private sector and even in public sector, most of the time we are dealing with microfinancing. We are here to develop a mechanism of risk transfer in disaster risk insurance in the form of an instrument like disaster risk insurance. And for this, we are developing a probabilistic modeling for primary hazards in Pakistan. That is first time. And the most important thing is the loss estimation model using Monte Carlo's simulation. And that is basically we are focusing on the insurance industry in Pakistan, wherein they will get all these knowledge products and they can develop their product market-based solution. Surely in the start we will provide help in the form of subsidized premium, but what we want that it should be market-based and should be sustainable, so that we can release burden on the fiscal space of the government. And this is what I wanted to say about the projects. We have projects from, as I already said, from all over the Pakistan, where basically we are focusing on the priority geographical areas and priority uh, hazards. Like we are nowadays focusing the climate-induced drought and flooding, and you see the situation getting critical in urban areas. Even Islamabad, which is it is thought that it is safe from flooding and things like that. Now you see that with the so many reasons, including encroachments, we are destroying the natural drainage pattern of Islamabad. And we have seen an incident in 11 last year. But you see, in future, if we don't change the pattern, we can face severe issues in Islamabad. Karachi is facing because there is no surface drainage mechanism. We are ready to provide funding for most disaster-prone cities in Pakistan, like in National Flood Protection Plan, they have identified about 20 cities all over the Pakistan where urban flooding and storm drainage component need to be strengthened. Like in Punjab, I can name Rawalpindi, Multan, Faisalabad, Dera Ghazi Khan, Muzaffargarh, Sindh, Karachi, Hyderabad, of course, Sakkar, Thatha, Jacobabad, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Peshawar, Dera Ismail Khan, and in Balochistan, Sibbi, Quetta, Dera La Yar Khan, and something like that. So this is what about the project. Now you ask about opportunities and plans for specifically for private sector. Uh, Basically, we are dealing with both the sectors, as I said earlier. But, priority is given to government sector, but in private sector, we do have opportunities. We provide funding. We have system to provide funding, and that systematic approach to entertain projects from NGOs, INGOs, UN agencies, and other registered community-based organization. But we are not dealing the private business oriented entities. I'm talking about the organization. The organization has to be accredited first in NDRMF using their accreditation criteria. However, UN agencies, don't require any accreditation. And we have the criteria available on our website. Project proposal received from these accredited organizations are entertained for due appraisal and funding. Moreover, we can provide support for the capacity development of the organization if they have some issues during the accreditation, and we can provide them support to develop their capacity so that they can acquire and they can get into the list of accredited organizations. For private sector, NDRMF provides maximum 70% of funding. Rest of the 30% funding has to be arranged by the respective organization by themselves. Same rule is for government sector, but in certain thematic areas, we do provide 100% funding as well. Like in early warning systems, we usually provide 100% funding. Some other specific area, mainly these are driven by donor restrictions. Some donors, they do provide 100%, but most of the donors, they require share from the implementing organization or fund implementation partners. However, there is no specific allocations for private sector organization, but we create a reasonable balance. Normally, we prefer government sector, but we do want to engage private sector for innovation, for something which we cannot do in the government sector, like CBDRM, community-based disaster risk management. The priorities area we do follow identified in NDMP, National Disaster Management Plan, NFPP 4, Flood Protection Plan 4, and our result framework, which guides us to which projects we need to give priority. How we ensure the compliances with social, gender, environmental safeguards, and preferably no land acquisition and no resettlement are involved. And most importantly, we within private sector, we prefer innovation, economy of scale, and value for money in proposed projects. As urban planner, one thing I will must like to highlight that.
Thank you, sir. We will again come to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So moving on to our next panelist, Ms. Aisha Khan. Ms. Aisha, since you're working as in civil society coalition for climate change, and you have a lot of experience and knowledge about climate change, adaptation, mitigation plans, and being based in Islamabad, we knew that Islamabad is the most planned and beautiful city, and we have seen recently that there are a lot of green spaces like Margla Hills National Park and F9 Park. And recently more parks are in the phase or being developed by the city. So do you think these type of interventions could be helpful or successful in building urban resilient infrastructure? If so, then what type of model of urban resilient infrastructure could be successful in Pakistan? Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are unmuted. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, CPI. Always a pleasure to join and have a conversation with or through your platform. So yes, you're quite right in saying that, Islamabad is indeed one of the most beautiful capitals in the world. And we have seen, in the past how beautiful Lahore was or Karachi was and how we allowed those cities to degrade. So we need to be very, very careful and mindful that we don't let the same fate befall Islamabad. So I think that you've touched upon the green spaces, but that's not the only thing that makes Islamabad or a city or any urban center resilient. So let me just quickly, for the audience, say what is really meant by urban resilience, or by making smart cities or making them livable cities in the light of climate change. So what we're talking about here is the capacity of a city, business, institution, individuals to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of adversity and be able to cope with crisis and fragility. So what that means is that for Islamabad and other cities in Pakistan, we need to strengthen the urban system so that they can withstand the disturbances. Islamabad is no different from any other city, in the world or in Pakistan. So as it gets more and more urbanized, it faces the common problems that urban cities face, which is water supply issues. There'll either be the quality will deteriorate or the quantity will go down. We have management of wastewater, we have solid waste, we have energy issues, we have loss of green spaces. You're talking about, addition of green spaces in Islamabad. And yes, we're very lucky. Our biggest asset is the Margala Hills National Park. And, through laws and through regulations and through civil society efforts, I think it has managed to be salvaged, and no more construction has been allowed in that area. But we've also lost a lot of green spaces due to urbanization and development. If you remember, in the early days of Islamabad, we had where the 7th Avenue is, we had about 40-year-old pines growing there. And now where the Embassy Road is, we had those beautiful row of jacaranda mature trees that had to be cut down. So these are some of the environmental costs that we have to factor into a rapidly urbanizing environment. So the sprawl also includes pollution, which is land pollution, air pollution, water pollution. So when we're talking about making a city or Islamabad resilient, I think the first thing that we do, since it is a planned city and we have that advantage that, in a planned city, you can move forward in a planned way and not let it become like an urban sprawl, we have to look at energy efficient construction, because due to climate change, the heat patterns will go up. And if we start using more air conditioning and cooling agents, we will be using more, creating more emissions in the city. We need to be very mindful of this fact that we're living in the foothills of a national park. That's very few capitals that I can think of in the world where you actually have the privilege of living in such close proximity of natural habitat and biodiversity. So it is our responsibility as citizens of Islamabad to ensure that we allow this area and its environmental integrity not to be spoiled by development. Then, groundwater. Groundwater abstraction everywhere in Pakistan is going up, but in Islamabad, the depletion rates in some sectors are extremely high. We've been talking about passing a groundwater regulatory framework, but we have not managed to do that. We have also not managed to introduce a tariff regime that will help in the conservation of water and maybe get people to feel a little more responsible in how they use water. Rainwater harvesting is something that we have not fully embraced, although this is an area in which we have so much rainfall that it can be used for domestic purposes and it can also be used for recharging aquifers. Drainage is, something that was talked about, and that is extremely important. The sites of urban flooding from Karachi should be a wake-up call for us in Islamabad, that this is what happens when you don't prepare the plan properly and factor in stormwater drains. This is extremely important. In cities that are well planned, for example, I'll give you the example of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I mean, torrential downpour over there, and within half an hour, all the water has disappeared. It's no standing water. Here, even the new infrastructure that has been built, and I live in IA3 sector, the signal-free corridor that has been built, I mean, there is no provision for water drainage over there. And with a little bit of rain, we have like a little pond all around that area. So this needs to be factored. In a growing city, what we also need is mass transit. We need to reduce emissions. We need to watch air quality. And we have to, we can do that by some regulatory frameworks around emissions, around, and, when we talk about reducing emissions, we have to provide better public transport than the metro system that we have. We also have, a city that has grown too fast. I mean, if you go back to 1965, this was a city that was designed without any traffic lights because it was not expected to grow and become what it has grown now. So, it was a city where 9 o'clock, the jackals were out on the streets. So today, when you look at it with, a population of 1.7 million, and it's projected to grow to a population of 2.2 million, we have to factor in all the infrastructure that will be needed, taking into account the carrying capacity of the city. Now, one more thing, and I'll wrap up here, is that Islamabad is also one of those unique cities where it serves as a transit center. Everyone who's going on a vacation up north, or to the Murray Hills, gathers in Islamabad. The infrastructure for its health that was developed to cater for the population of Islamabad is being used now from KP all over. So there's an increased burden on that infrastructure as well. So for the city to be resilient, it has to take all these future demands that will be emerging due to the increase in population, and the future development should be around the concept of a smart city. So if we take all those factors into account and we move forward, towards a clean, green Islamabad with more solarization, it's a city in which we can easily declare Islamabad a solar city, for example, because of its present size. It can become a model for others to emulate. So, these are some of the areas that I wanted to touch upon. And if you have any, follow-up questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Aisha. Definitely, we need to increase the smart way, the capacity of a city for the safe, sustainable cities, and we need to increase the energy efficient settings and a mass transit system that could cater the emerging or increasing urban structure and urbanization. Since I have one more question for you. You have seen recently that the E11, the massive flooding was seen in last year, this year. So, do you think any resilient plan which could help, or any urban plan that could help mitigate the effects of this hazardous event, which are coming series by series? Over to you, ma'am.
I think that, we've already touched upon that, because when you have a planned city, you take all these factors into account. Now, there's a lot of new infrastructure that has come up in Islamabad in the last 10 or 15 years. I recall very few capitals in the world, especially in the global north, where you go every, 2 or 3 or 5 years, and you see such a transformation that you hardly recognize that city anymore. I didn't live in Islamabad always. And I remember being surprised, every time I'd be away for 5 years, I would come back and I would say, oh my God, I mean, I don't recognize this city. And now in the last 10 years, much more so. So a lot of construction has taken place. And, Islamabad is a seismic area. So other than climate induced construction and energy conservation methods, we also have to be very careful. We experienced, that earthquake in 2005, and luckily there was not too much damage. But in future, I think disaster risk reduction has to go hand in hand with the carrying capacity. And when we are planning these, the land use plan needs to be made. We don't really have a land use plan, and we don't do an environmental impact assessment. If you take all these things, together and don't design that environmental impact assessment to make sure that the plan you've made is passed. That's what we usually tend to do in Pakistan. So what we need to do is actually take the necessary mitigation measures and then adapt, because we have to adapt to the changing climate. We have to adapt to the growing needs of the people. We also have to adapt to the need for extra infrastructure that we will need. So how do we balance between maintaining the green spaces? Because right now, as you see, when you have to construct, you have to cut down on green spaces. When you have to increase infrastructure, road infrastructure, you have to cut down on green spaces. So if you have better mass transit, you will not need to constantly invest in gray infrastructure. And getting the approval, everything must get its approval, and it should be monitored right in the beginning. I've never really understood why in our cities encroachments take place forever, and nobody is there then to stop that from happening. And when it's a fait accompli, then we go and we destroy and we demolish infrastructure, and then we don't take that responsibility for removing that debris and disposing it in a proper way. So all these things have to be taken into account. Planning has to be very serious, and all the factors that go into good planning, which involves drainage and construction and waste management and quality of water and energy sources, have to go into it. So if we start doing that, I'm sure we'll be able to manage. Islamabad so far is still fairly pretty, fairly green, and we should feel ourselves blessed to be living here, but we should keep this environment clean, and we should not let any degradation and deterioration of the environment take place over here.
Of course, we need more mitigation plan to make Islamabad more beautiful and for the future generations. Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to request Nabil. Nabil, since you are based in Karachi, and you guys are doing wonderful job with your technology you are using for the resilient infrastructure in Pakistan. So I would like to ask you about what is the ideal technology that you are currently using, especially if it is for the low income communities. That could be cost effective, and secondly, you have seen several events of floods in Karachi, in urban centers especially. So in your view, what could be the possible innovative solution that could overcome the challenges of floods, heat waves through your borderless tech technology? Over to you, Nabil.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate what you're doing here. In terms of having an ideal sort of technology, the ideal technology would be something that costs the least and is the most sustainable. So ideally net zero, but also something that's affordable by the end user. And especially when you talk about affordable housing for the end user, we've seen in Pakistan that the primary concern is the initial cost of the building itself, right? And then if it's sustainable, that's something that most end users don't seem to know much about or care about. However, at a government level, at an international level, that's something that really not only helps the end user, but also helps the country at White. And that's because when we talk about affordable housing and sustainable housing and climate smart housing, yes, climate smart homes are very good for the end user. But the important thing here is that it's even more important for the country. And I say that because generally, when we talk about sustainable housing, we talk about homes being good for the environment, good for the planet. But something we don't perhaps often talk about is how much energy and water they actually save and how much their contribution is to the sustainable development goals. If you consider building 5 million homes in Pakistan as the government's agenda, no one really talks about how we're going to provide these homes with energy and water. As we know to date, we don't have enough electricity and water in Pakistan. So for an additional 5 million homes, that's a huge amount. And from data, we know that 40% of carbon-related, energy-related carbon emissions come from housing. So that's something that we should also be looking into. So the ideal technology for me would be something that's sustainable and is cost effective at the same time, because in the Pakistani context, that's something that's very important. What we've done at Models Tech is we've achieved net zero housing. That's net zero at an annual basis, but even in the initial carbon footprint, our technology has 90% lower carbon footprint when you compare with conventional concrete homes. At the same time, they cost 20 to 40% less than concrete homes. So we're making housing not only affordable, but sustainable at the same time. And that's something that's quite rare when you talk about sustainability, because generally when you think about sustainability in the global north, especially, you see that a sustainable product is more expensive. So in the Pakistani context, the ideal thing would be to make it affordable and the more logical decision for the end user as well. At the same time, we've also made the homes energy efficient. So we have a wall system which is 12 times more insulating than a concrete wall. So as a result, you would see that there's a 10 to 15 degree temperature drop when you enter the homes. And this is without air conditioning. Again, this relates to the climate smart credentials of the homes. And also for the end user, I feel this is a big motivation because these communities, they cannot often afford air conditioning. It's very expensive. So if you have a house where you don't have to sleep on the roof every night because it's too hot inside, I think that's a game changer for the segment. So that's a couple of things that we've been working on. We've also worked on making the technology a lot more scalable in the sense that it's much faster to produce because they're factory built homes. At the same time, it's very easy to transport them. As assembly time is very quick. It takes as little as a week to set up the entire home. So it's scalable in the sort that we can cater to the energy and housing shortage in Pakistan, and then also make it affordable and sustainable at the same time. So that's sort of what we're aiming to do. But another important thing here is that ideal technology, yes, we should really focus on that. But another thing that we should focus on is the ideal concept. And by ideal concept, I mean having sort of the ideal community, because you can only contribute to a certain SDGs through ideal technologies and housing methods. But if you actually plan communities, like Ms. Aisha also mentioned, if we plan for sustainable transport, sustainable water, drainage systems, etc., that has a much larger impact on society. So what we're really aiming to do is create not just net zero homes, but net zero housing communities, communities where you have sustainable transport and other key aspects as well. And then communities that work completely off grid. So considering that we don't have enough electricity and water, it's important that these communities are self-sustaining and sort of autonomous in that way. So we don't really add more pressure on the national grid. With respect to the current situation in Karachi, yes, it's been raining unexpectedly a lot. And it's been raining since the past 3 months, something we're not used to in Karachi at all. And Karachi is definitely not designed for this. And you've seen that in the footage and the rapid urban flooding happening year round. And that's just one of the many risks that climate change brings with us. But we've also seen an increase in temperatures in the city recently, especially during the peak summer months. And like I mentioned, that there are a lot of active strategies that we can use to make the homes more comfortable for the end user, considering that by the year 2100, NASA released a statistic that showed that the average daily temperature would be around 50 degrees Celsius. So we really need to design in that climate smart way. So there are a lot of active strategies that we use, but a very key important thing here is to use passive strategies because they don't cost a lot of money and they can be implemented with basically any technology. So for some of our housing projects in Karachi, we're doing passively designed homes that have wind catchers. They have such shading devices that they don't allow a lot of heat gain inside during the day, and they're very comfortable. And there's a constant natural breeze inside the homes, even though the homes are quite small. So such passive strategies, I think, are very important for a city like Karachi, for in the Pakistani context, but also in the global context, where we can create homes that are flood resilient and also climate smart in the long run. So I'd just like to wrap up with another thing. When we talk about sort of betting on the ideal technology and assessing how much water and electricity they can save for the country, a key important thing that I think is missing in Pakistan is a national green building policy. And the reason I say that is because we don't have enough data how much these green homes can actually save in Pakistan. So I think that's something that we really need to work towards, gathering that sort of data, because the advantage of that is not only would it contribute to greener homes and saving electricity and water in the future, and new construction buildings, but also with existing homes, we could retrofit our existing homes to make them more efficient. And that would save energy for the end user, but also for the national good. So I think that's also another thing we should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nabil. And definitely, we need to increase the energy efficient infrastructure, and we need to inculcate the passive housing design into urban resilient infrastructure to cater to mitigate the effects of heat waves, especially in Karachi and all over the world. Thank you for your inputs. With this, I want to move to Mr. Mubashir. Sir, I have one more question. I would like to ask you about the disaster risk reduction policy. How do you categorize and identify events as disaster in Pakistan? And in disaster risk reduction policy, flooding is incorporated as an urban planning. What are the institutional decorum and any policy amendments on that? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. When we talk about the disaster risk reduction policies, NDMA, actually, they have parameters to define calamity and disasters. And whenever, actually, in general definition, when something happened beyond the capacity of the institutions and the community, that is termed as disaster, when it cannot be handled normally. But there are official definition. At the moment, I don't have those definition, but there are. Based on that, they declare the emergency and the emergency aid area. Now when we talk about flooding, actually, the urban area, we knew it before any monsoon that it can happen like that. But the problem is that we do have master plans, we have a drainage plan, but implementation is always a big question mark. I was working in local government, government of Punjab, and posted in many cities. But whatever we do, it's contingency planning. There is no long-term sustainable planning. We know that no sewer system can handle the storm water. We need to have urban surface drainage intact. But you see, with the passage of time, with the encroachments and with the massive infrastructure, we do creating problem for ourselves. Like you see in Islamabad, it is well-planned city and first city of Pakistan, well drained through nature. Earlier, it was following the master plan in true spirit. Now the recent sectors, they are trying to make alignment of natural drainage channel unduly. And with that, they are just reducing their capacity. Similarly, the other problem is in the existing area of Islamabad and even in the new, a lot of encroachment, it is happening along these drainage channel. And on the other hand, like in Karachi, we are throwing our solid waste without discrimination in these channels. So there is a capacity. When you interfere with the nature always come back. So this is the problem. The important question: do we have a proper updated? Because master plan is not one-time cut-off activity. We need to update based on the emerging climate change scenario, based on emerging needs of Pakistan, economic changes in Pakistan. But what is being done that if a master plan is available and it was created 20 years back, we consider that it is sufficient. We need to have R&D, proper R&D for cities, and we need to follow and we need to update every 3 years the master plans. Similarly, at macro level, we don't have any national land use plan either on a provincial level, so that we should know which city we should stop horizontally. Like in Islamabad, as mentioned by other panelists, that and there is a question that cities are growing horizontally. We need to go for smart development. We need to stop this horizontal mushroom development. We need to go for compact development, and we need to save our green area, our agriculture land, and we need to set boundaries for the cities. So for that reason, there are 2 3 actions we need to take. We need to have land use plan, proper land use plan. We need to have capacity of concerned organization to implement those plans, and then we need to have a national level policy where which city we want to stop their expansion, and we need to develop new cities even throughout the Pakistan, but we need to stop big cities, their expansion, and we need to go for smart development. In Islamabad, we see that right from just after Texland till Rawat, we have all the development, and nobody knows where we can stop this development. With the expansion of the infrastructure, ring road, motorways, and bypasses, we are promoting this expansion, horizontal expansion. So we need to think. At the same time, we need to adopt that we are pouring grey infrastructure, a lot of concrete, and we are creating heat island. This phenomena is disturbing microclimatic factors, and we are facing severe events of weather and climate-induced situation. So we need to go for green buildings like rainwater harvesting. We have flooding water and we are wasting. We don't have any idea how to store them, how to recharge our aquifer. In the surrounding of Islamabad and within city, we can make such arrangement that it can go into the ground. It can recharge our groundwater. Cities are already facing severe shortage of water during dry season. So we need to develop rainwater harvesting and recharging mechanism. So there are many initiatives we can take. And regarding disaster risk reduction, we need to go for careful development. Like in Islamabad, the implementation of building code is highly engineered building. They are following, but in normal trends, and especially unplanned part of the city and in Rawalpindi, most of the area, they are not caring about, they are not following those building codes. And God forbid, if we face something earthquake of like 2005, we may face severe problems. So we need to have careful DRR mainstream development policies and then implementation. Thank you.
National green building policy, and we need to work on micro and macro level planning in major cities, especially in building codes and all that. Since we have questions from online audience, but most of the questions are addressed by the panelists. Now I want to move for the closing remarks to Dr. Hina Aslam. She is the research fellow and heading China Study Center and Energy Unit at STPI, and she's also national coordinator at Climate Action Network South Asia. Over to you, ma'am, for the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Saliha, and thank you so much for organizing this very important seminar. I think on the topic that we are experiencing and suffering, the need to discuss it at this time, while coming to the office and experiencing the large floods on the roads, and not talking about the rural settings or the settings which we consider as little overlooked, but the ones which are considered to be livable in our society. So with the patches of huge floods on the roads, that really shows the infrastructure being developed in our country with the urbanization, with the population growth, and with a lot of pressure on the natural resources, and of course the impacts of climate change that we are witnessing at this time of the year. And as we know that there's no more time for mitigation, it's more of an adaptation and the action that needs to be taken. And while we have discussed about some of the key challenges, some of the issues, and some of the recommendations as well put forward by our esteemed panelists, which I'm really grateful to all of you, Mubashir Saab, Nabil, Ms. Aisha Khan, for their valuable time and contributions and inputs, I think, which has really raised a lot of awareness, a lot of knowledge that has been shared, and the best practices and the technologies and the innovations that could be possible solutions to promote the resilience among cities and the rural settings of Pakistan. So while thanking, and I think not much to add at the front where the discussion has already happened on the challenges, but on the policy side, the recommendation on the green building, and also what I've learned very recently is that the urban policies have been made mandatory by the local governments. They feel in terms of they have to prepare an urban plan before making any kind of city planning or urban planning in their cities. And the KP province has been a kind of a key player at this time, where they have the first draft ready of the urban policy, which could actually inspire the other provinces to also look into this direction and see that could that how the policy could be made for the other parts like Sindh, in terms of what we are witnessing in Karachi and Punjab, and in other parts where it could lead to a kind of robust plan and robust structure of organizing and planning the cities, incorporating the land use plans, incorporating the robust environmental impact assessments, and the implementation, the monitoring and evaluation to ensure that the cities are planned in a more resilient manner. So with this was some of the information that I thought could be shared in terms of what we are seeing is this kind of a momentum that we see. And I'm sure with the technologies and with the affordable housing units, as the initiative taken by Modulus Tech and some other industries and some other startups, I think that would kind of promote as a flagship models for the cities and the industries to adopt. If we see in the overall scenario of this time, we see a boom in construction. We see lots of over overtaking of agricultural lands, which are being converted into housing schemes. But there has been no implementing policy on regulation to sort of address the concerns and the issues of the cities being planned. And again, putting a lot of pressure on these resources, putting a lot of pressure on the resilience that is to be looked at. This is definitely what we need to consider in terms of while we are experiencing this wave of climatic hazards which are hampering the country's infrastructure planning. So in terms of that, I think it has been a very useful seminar for us to understand what the government stakeholders and the agencies are planning to do and are playing their initiatives in this their capacity. The need to involve the private sector in this to sensitize them of the cruciality and the sensitivity of these matters and to build capacity around these issues. I think it's of a really important need of the time, because as we see more of the thinking and more of the appetite towards the commercial side of urban planning, I think we need to build capacity to move beyond that, and how we could look into directly into achieving the sustainability and the sustainable development goals that could be aligned with this planning, with these policy structures, with these informed policy making, I think is what we require. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity to wrap up, and thank you all the panelists on behalf of SDPI. I'm highly grateful for the interventions and for your time. Thank you.
Just there are a couple of new questions. So in the interest of time, if our panelists can address them in the Q&A box, respond to them individually, maybe if it is possible for you.
I have responded few questions, but for all we may need time. But mainly the question of capacity of the organization and their capacity to implement the laws. We do have laws, implementation is lacking, and we need updated plan and the implementation mechanism. And most importantly, the political will. So this is the generalized answer, but for the specific, we need to go through the questions.
Thank you very much, Nabil and Mr. Mubashir, for your time and for your valuable inputs. And we have learned a lot from you. And thank you very much and good day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Pleasure.